So I was looking at my shop doors the other day, and I kind of noticed that there was probably some room for improvement. So it's time to replace them. At 30 below, most of my heat inside the shop is going right through those lovely seals. Sorry for the background noise, but we're in the middle of a project, a very large project, which is also part of the reason why I haven't been very forthcoming with the videos. This project involved a rather large, substantial construction on our house. There you go. It's half gone. We've been having fun finding some treasures, including these way cool aviators that I found in the ceiling, along with the dead cats and squirrels in the basement. Welcome to Therapy Woodworks on YouTube, and welcome to Therapy Woodworks' cozy little shop. I'm Dan. For those of you who are returning viewers, I thank you very much for your subscription. For those of you who just found me, thank you very much, and I hope you get to subscribe. Once I took off the old doors and stripped away all of the trimmings and whatnot, I realized I have an 8 foot by 8 foot opening. So a unique opportunity for me to be able to create a trifold drawer, which had been floating around in my head there for a while. Come on in, sit a spell, see how I did it. The idea for the doors was to have some clear wood, so I used cedar for that. Rough cedar is the only thing that was available to me, so I had to do a lot of planing on all of the bits and pieces. The process starts by cutting to length some of the 2x6 rough cut cedar panels. And then going over to the jointer to joint a face and of course an edge. Now these are 8 foot long boards and they just barely fit in my shop. These 8 foot long cedar boards are going to be the stiles of the door, or the vertical parts of the door. Now that I have a face and an edge jointed so that they are square and at 90 degrees, I can go on to the table saw to get the third side all machined true. And you can see here, I even actually have to open the existing doors to actually cut an 8 foot piece of wood in my little shop. I use my planer with the door open. It's a really tight fit in the shop. I have to use every square inch. So there'll be 6 stiles, 2 per door. All 6 of the stiles now S4S or square 4 sides. They're all squared up and ready to go. Now the rails of the door is something a little bit different. There's going to be 4 rails altogether, so there'll be 3 panels in the doors, so 4 sets of rails that will be around each of the panels. And they're going to be a little bit wider, so 6 inches just didn't cut it. Each of the rails I have to glue together 2x6 rough cedar boards in order to achieve the desired width that I want for this door. That's a lot of pieces to be cutting up to length. Rough cutting the rails to a more manageable length made it easier to do the machining on the face and one of the edges on the jointer. It was then over to the table saw where I could get that final width that I desired. We were starting to get stacks of lumber all over the shop. I was utilizing every horizontal surface that I could to store lumber. Then onto the planer. A whole lot of planing. It just seems that I'm moving one pile of lumber from one place to another. So there you have it, all the rails and all the stiles are all machined to length and they're ready for further gluing and assembly. I decided to glue up 2 panels at a time just to save some clamps. So these Bessie pipe clamps are a new addition to my clamping fleet. I'm really starting to like these things. I didn't think I would because they're kind of big and heavy and bulky and cumbersome, but they give you a nice elevated surface. The other thing I did on this glue up was the little clamps from my woodpecker's square set. I used a little piece of caul underneath the board and then just right on the top of the joints there just to keep them really, really flat and smooth. And yep, I pretty much depleted all my clamps in the shop. Used up every one, the clamp racks were empty. So by design, the rails of my doors are exactly 12.5 inches wide. So they can fit through my 13-inch planer. So after I run them through the planer, I then cut them to their final width and also the final length. I made a boo-boo here, which is going to come back to haunt me. I'll explain that a little later. We're on to creating the raised panels, the insert panels, which are going to fit between the stiles and the rails, and they'll be eventually painted all black, just for an interesting, nice contrast, which will also actually match the hardware on the door that I've all picked out. And you think I had a lot of bits and pieces doing the rails and stiles? Man, you should see the Jenga pile I had when I started machining up the SPF, standard construction material, for the raised panels. Okay, thought I'd just stop for a second here and just show you when I'm actually on the jointer and jointing this material, which can be somewhat suspect, such as the building material can be. Like this one, for instance, has a very poor area of planing. So when I am on the jointer and I'm contemplating what I'm going to do, what I always do is I consider that this is on the outside section. So this is always going to be my jointed edge, the nice edge. and this is going to be my flat face to start off with on the jointer. The reason why is that I'll use this particular piece and I'll make sure that this section gets put on the outside of the panel that I'm gluing together. So in this case, I'm gluing together 4 pieces so that this will be the very upper edge. So what's going to happen at the end of the day is that this piece will probably be trimmed off. And so all the Mr. Yuck will be gone. So first step in the process, joint the face, turn that up on the side, joint the edge, and then at the end of the day, that gets cut off. Here we are back to making more Jenga piles. It started to get very confusing, so I incorporated a numbering system. This basically tells me which are the best pieces, which are the worst pieces, from number 1s to number 3s. And that way when I go to do the glue up, I can make sure that the number 3s are on the outside of the panel, which are probably going to get cut off. A whole bunch more trimming on the saw and a whole bunch more planing. A word to the wise, don't do this at home. You should really pay attention to what you're doing. Not be a jackass like Dan. Time to use up every clamp in the shop again. Glue up all 9 of my insert panels. These panels at the end of the day are not narrow enough to go through the planer, so it's breaking out the hand plane and making a whole bunch of shavings. Utilizing the slider table, make very quick work of cutting my panels to width and length in a very repeatable fashion. So this next bit gets a little bit dicey as there's a lot of blade exposed. I didn't want these panels to be coved or anything too fancy like that, but I did want to have a bit of a raising on them. So I just set my table saw to a 10-degree blade angle and used my high fence and just run the board along it. And I did all 4 sides. That way you just get a bit of a raised panel. Take your time and be very cautious when you do this. There's a lot of blade exposed. So the idea here was to have a tongue and groove insert that the raised panels will go into the rails and the stiles. So after the profiling, the first step was to cut one of the sides of the panels to start forming the tongue, which will go into the groove in the rails and the stiles. So after some trial and error, I snuck up on the exact perfect fit for the raised panels to go into the rails and the stiles for the groove that I was going to use. These are 3/4 inches in depth. I figured may as well make them large and add as much strength as I can to these doors because, like I say, they're going to be very heavy doors. The machining to make the raised profile in the panels wasn't exactly a great process. It did leave some blade marks, but the Rotex sander by Festool made short order of it. And as you can see, once you sand it all flat, the pine comes up really nice and it creates a nice flat bevel. Boy, using that Festool in the Rotex mode is just like using a belt sander. So now you can kind of get the idea of how the doors are going to be formed. So here, remember that boo-boo I mentioned earlier? Well, as it turns out, I didn't quite leave enough length on my rails. The intention was that I was going to tongue and groove them into the styles of the doors. I made them too short, and I wouldn't have been able to keep my doors 8 foot wide. So, as an alternative, we're trying something a little bit different. When you get fed lemons, you better be able to make some lemonade. So in this case, it's the Festool domino to the rescue. Now I know the weight of these doors are going to be quite heavy, and I'm really relying upon this glue joint to be very, very strong. I sure hope that Titebond 3 holds things together. It has in the past, in a lot of the experiments that I've seen, it should hold together. And the dominoes are there just to guide the pieces and keep them flat and smooth. With the domino holes all cut in the rails and stiles, I could then turn my attention to making the groove that the raised panels will be fitting into. It was a pretty simple process with the rails. I could do that using a 1/2 inch bottoming bit on my router table. Not quite so easy for the stiles though, being 8 feet long. I couldn't feed them on my table, and I had to do that by hand with a DeWalt handheld. So I used an edge guide to keep me in line to cut the dados in the stiles, and I even figured out how to hook up my Festool vacuum system for the extraction of the dust. Pretty fancy big setup once I was all done. On to the sanding process, which at best can be very, very tedious. I did recently acquire myself an ETS-EC 125 sander from Festool. It's a very lightweight sander, and it does a very quick job of sanding. It has a very large rotational stroke on it. The next step in the process is to actually get some paint on those raised panels that I want to use as an insert. Okay, so let's take a break from all this sanding and priming and painting and stuff, and we're gonna have a little product palaver. Product palaver. I should do that. Like every week I should have a product palaver. If you're interested in having a product palaver, just leave a message in the comments below, and I'll do absolutely nothing about it because I don't have the time to do that stuff. Anyways, let's have a product palaver. This primer that I'm using on here is a product from Benjamin Moore called Super Spec. Now, I like to experiment with products just like any other person does. So when I went down to my local hardware store, I didn't have anything specific in mind. I wanted a product that would act basically as a barrier, as a seal coat for the wood, more than anything. I'm not really interested in it as a filler because this is just an exterior door. I want it to look good, but I want the top coat to go on fairly flat and smooth. Now, I'm not finishing it by adding any putties or filling any cracks or anything like that. It's one coat, as you saw when I put it on with the pad, as evenly as I can, and I'm sanding it off with 220 grit. Now, I'll read right from the can where it says, do not apply below temperatures of 10 degrees. It's been 15 degrees in my shop now for 3 days since I put this on. And for the American viewers there, 15 degrees is about, oh, I don't know, just catch up with the rest of the world, would you? It's above 10 degrees. The humidity has not been bad here in northern BC, so that's not a real problem. The other thing it says, dry to touch in 30 minutes. Yep, it pretty much did that. Dry to recoat in 1 to 2 hours. Sand smooth when dry. Dry to recoat 1 to 2 hours. Sand smooth when dry. So it makes sense that in 1 to 2 hours it should be sandable, right? It's not very sandable at all. And the problem is this, and I'll show you. As soon as you hit this product with the sander, all it does is plug up the pores on the sandpaper. So it's been difficult to sand. Yeah, I'm making do by blowing it off with the blower and getting the large chunks out of here. But I can tell you, I'm not too pleased with Benjamin Moore primers. I'm going to do a little bit more research and find some other product because it hinders the process. Anyways, that's my product palaver for today. For the top coat, I decided to use a rattle can wood paint, flat black. I started off doing this in my shop, but then realized it got pretty fumy pretty quick. So it was up to the Taj Mahal, I mean the carport that we refer to as the Taj Mahal, and got all the panels all painted at once. It looked really nice and shiny to start off with, but they dried to a very flat black. Hey, here we go, door glue up. This is going to be an interesting process. I have to do this one all on my own. The other 2 doors are already glued up, but I had an assistant to do that. Today I'm doing this all by myself. So I've got one of the stiles sitting on the bench here, and it is clamped to the bench securely so I can operate one-handedly. I got my other stile sitting over there. I've got my rails and my panel inserts all set up in the right order, ready to go. I've got my Tight Bond Type 3 glue. I've got all my dominoes. I got some cleanup material. I don't have any liquid courage, so wish me luck. So on your mark, get set, let's go. The first thing I'm gonna do is get all of my dominoes set one at a time. So I fill the holes full of goo. I spread the glue inside the holes, make sure there's good coverage because I need all the strength that I can get from these dominoes this time because it's supporting a lot of weight. These doors turned out a little bit heavier than what I thought they were going to, but that's okay. I'm sure it'll still work. Nope, forgot my trusty mallet. Pound them in until all the glue comes spurting out. Take a bit more glue, spread it on the dominoes. Make sure all the dominoes are very glued, and I'm also making sure there's enough glue on the face for the first rail to go on. My first rail, this is door 1. They're all appropriately marked. Item number 1. This should just fit in. The slots like so. Okay. So I'm just putting on these clamps as a temporary measure until I get the other style put on. That sets it down in place. We got some good glue coming out. So the first panel I got going in, and these panels, all I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit of glue right in the middle. And what this does, it'll secure the panel, give it some strength, not much, but it'll allow for expansion and contraction. It's really important because if I didn't, these things are going to warp and buckle and do all kinds of funny things on me. Okay, and there's that one. So we're going to keep repeating this over and over until I get the complete door assembled. The first two, it took me about 45 minutes each. Okay, so as you can see, it's all assembled and put together. I just got to put the next style on the door. So before I do that, I got to get all of the dominoes in all of the holes with all of the glue applied, and then stick it all together, and hopefully everything lines up. Hopefully. Pound them in place, hydraulically bottom them out. If you don't do this, they won't seat properly. Here's the hard part. Everything's all glued up and ready to go. The hard part is putting the other style on. You got to kind of work from one end to the other. And this is not going to be fun without my assistant. That's okay, I'll muddle through. I just start from one end. Yeah, I get the first one lined up, and hopefully the rest fall into place like dominoes. Bravo, it actually started. So what I do then is I just temporarily put a clamp on here, so that'll just prevent this end from coming off. And then I can go through and line up the dominoes and the panels as we go along, and I just see what's holding it up. Whether it's the panel or whether it's the next set of dominoes. This one's going together fine. So all the dominoes are set in place there. The first panel's in. Okay, the next panel is in. The next dominoes are going down. The next panel is in line. Oh, now these dominoes on the end here, they need a little bit of adjustment, persuasion, so I can lay it down and clamp it up properly. And I just like to give it a few little love taps just to seat it into place. Ah, wonderful. There you have it. One glued up door. Hey, back to doing a final sanding. I use 220 grit. It's probably a little on the fine side, but 220 grit it is for the final sanding of all the cedar. The cedar is pretty soft, so make sure that you do a very thorough sanding. I use the pencil marks in between my sanding grits just to make sure that I'm getting it all sanded. The final application of a coat, I'm using something new to me. I'm using Spar Varnish, and it was a very interesting process, and I really like the outcome of it. So we did 3 coats of Spar Varnish, allowing it to dry 24 hours in between and giving it a 400 grit sanding in between coats. Like I say, I was very, very impressed with this particular product. I wanted to achieve a high gloss on this, and once you did the application and let it level out, it was really quite beautiful. It really allowed the grain structure and the knot structure of the cedar really stand out. That's what I wanted to achieve on these doors. So once the doors were completed, it was a matter of installing some framing and an aluminum threshold and hinges and hardware. It took a little bit of finesse just to make it just right. So it's not very often that I have to work in the shop with all of the doors open. So I decided to put the man style entry door as the middle door. At the end of the day, I'm very pleased with these doors. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the video. It was a long process, and this is the biggest project that I've had ongoing. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Dan from Therapy Woodwork signing off. Well, without hitting the camera, I hope. Oh man, how did that happen? What was that? I doubt this is gonna work. I didn't think so.